Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States, took office in 1853 under a cloud of personal and political turmoil. Pierce, a Northerner with Southern sympathies, campaigned as a candidate who could unify the increasingly divided nation. However, Pierce's administration is going to quickly become a lightning rod for controversy, especially over the issue of slavery. In today's episode, we're going to look at the Pierce administration and how it set the stage for the rise of the third two-party system in this country, culminating in the election of 1856. Let's get started. The most significant and disastrous decision of Franklin Pierce's administration was his support for the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. This bill, which was introduced by Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois, effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which prohibited slavery above the 3630 parallel. This bill, however, introduced the concept of popular sovereignty, allowing settlers of Kansas and Nebraska to determine whether or not they would permit slavery. The passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act ignited a firestorm in the North and led to a violent conflict in Kansas, which became known as Bleeding Kansas. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers flooded the territory, bound and determined to influence the outcome of the slavery question. The ensuing violence included raids, assaults, and even massacres, making Kansas a symbol of the nation's deepening divisions. Pierce's administration, which had hoped to placate both the Northern and Southern interests, instead found itself increasingly isolated. The Kansas-Nebraska Act not only destroyed the Whig Party, but it's going to give rise to a new political force, the Republican Party, a party dedicated to stopping the expansion of slavery. The creation of the Republican Party in 1854 was in direct response to the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the perceived betrayal of Northern interests by the Democratic Party. This new political party was now home to a very diverse coalition of anti-slavery Whigs, free soilers, abolitionists, and disaffected Democrats. Its central platform was the opposition of slavery into the Western territories, which its members viewed as a moral evil and a direct threat to the future of free labor. The Republican Party's first national convention was held in Philadelphia in June of 1856, and this was a raucous and energetic crowd, reflecting the party's rapid growth and the passion of its members. The party's platform was uncompromising on its stance against the expansion of slavery, declaring the maintenance of principles promulgated in the Declaration of Independence and embodied in the federal Constitution is essential to the preservation of our Republican institutions. The Republicans nominated John C. Frémont, a military officer and explorer known as the Pathfinder, for his expedition in the American West. Frémont's selection was a strategic choice. Although he lacked significant political experience, his reputation as a national hero and his association with the expansion of American territory made him an appealing candidate for a party that championed both free soil and free labor. His candidacy symbolized a new direction in American politics, one that would not budge in its opposition to the expansion of slavery and was willing to challenge the dominance of the Democratic Party. However, the nominating process within the Democratic Party was quite contentious in 1856. Incumbent President Franklin Pierce, despite his desire for a second term, faced strong opposition within his own party due to the consequences of the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the ensuing violence in Kansas. His support for the act alienated him from many Northern Democrats, and as a result, his candidacy was viewed as indefensible by a significant portion of the Democratic Party. At the Democratic National Convention held in Cincinnati, Ohio in June of 1856, Pierce struggled to garner enough support to secure the party's nomination. On the first ballot, Pierce only received a fraction of the delegates' votes, with many instead supporting his chief rival, Stephen A. Douglas, the chief architect of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. However, Douglas, too, was unable to garner enough support for the party's nomination, mainly because his name was attached to the bill as well, making him equally divisive. As the convention wore on and it became clear that neither Pierce nor Douglas could win, James Buchanan emerged as a compromise candidate. Buchanan, a seasoned diplomat and former Secretary of State, was seen as a candidate who could appeal to both Northern and Southern Democrats. His long career in public service, including stints as the minister to Russia and the United Kingdom, had largely kept him away from the domestic controversies surrounding slavery, making him a much more palatable option for a party who was struggling to maintain unity. After several ballots, James Buchanan will secure the party's nomination, with John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky chosen as his running mate in order to balance out the ticket both geographically and politically. Buchanan was a doughface, as they called him, a Northerner with Southern sympathies, and he believed that the Constitution provided for the protection of slavery where it already existed. However, he also argued that the federal government had no authority to impose or prohibit slavery in the territories, a position that aligned with the Southern view of states' rights. Buchanan's supporters hoped that his diplomatic skills and moderate stance would help preserve the Union in the face of growing tensions between North and South. Buchanan's platform supported the enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act, the continuation of popular sovereignty in the territories, and preserving the Union. However, Buchanan's refusal to take a strong stand on the critical issues of the day led many to believe him as a candidate of inaction, more interested in preserving the status quo than actually addressing the most important crises going on in this country. The Republican Party's nominee, John C. Frémont, was a stark contrast to Buchanan. Frémont was a national hero, known for his expeditions that mapped out much of the American West. His military exploits during the Mexican-American War and his role in the Bear Flag Revolt, which led to California's brief independence from Mexico, made Frémont a household name. Frémont's political experience was limited. He served as one of California's first U.S. senators after it was admitted in 1850. But despite his lack of political experience, the Republicans felt his reputation of being a man of action and his association with the Free Soil movement made him the man to carry the banner in 1856. Frémont's campaign was built on the principles free soil, free labor, free speech, free men, Frémont. This slogan was the embodiment of the Republican Party's core beliefs. Their strong opposition to the expansion of slavery into the territories, their support for the right of free laborers, and their preservation and the protection of civil liberties. The party's platform also called for Kansas to be admitted as a free state. It also called for the construction of a transcontinental railroad and for federally funded internal improvements. However, Frémont's candidacy is going to face significant challenges. The Democrats are going to paint him as an inexperienced adventurer, even circulating rumors that he's a secret Catholic. This is a charge designed to play on the anti-Catholic prejudices of the time. But despite these attacks, Frémont's going to see an energized movement in the North, particularly those who are concerned about the spread of slavery into the territories and the violence that's going on in Kansas. The third major candidate in the election of 1856 was Millard Fillmore, who was now a candidate of the American Party, also known as the Know Nothing Party. Fillmore, who had served as the 13th president of the United States after the death of Zachary Taylor, was the one who signed into law the Compromise of 1850, which included the controversial Fugitive Slave Act. The Know Nothing Party had emerged in the early 1850s in response to the increasing influx of immigrants, particularly Catholics from Ireland and Germany. The party's members, who were secretive about their activities, hence the name Know Nothing, advocated for restrictions on immigration and a longer naturalization process for immigrants. They also supported the idea of limiting the political influence of Catholics, who they feared were more loyal to the Pope than to the United States. Fillmore's platform in 1856 reflected the nativist views of the Know Nothing Party. He supported stronger immigration laws and opposed slavery into the territories, although he would stop short of supporting or endorsing the Republican Party's platform. Fillmore hoped to position himself as a moderate alternative to the increasingly polarized Democratic and Republican parties, hoping to appeal to the voters who were uncomfortable voting for the pro-slavery Democrats and the anti-slavery militancy of the Republicans. However, Fillmore's candidacy faced significant obstacles. The Know-Nothing Party was in decline by 1856, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that slavery was the issue of the day, not immigration. Many former Whigs who would have supported Fillmore tended to gravitate to the Republican Party simply because the Republican Party offered a clearer stance on the pressing issues of the day. And because of this, Fillmore's campaign failed to gain a lot of traction outside of a few pockets of support, including those border states. The campaign of 1856 was one of the most bitterly contested in American history, reflecting the deepening divisions within the country. The Democrats sought to portray Buchanan as a steady hand who could lead the country through the turbulent waters of sectional conflict, while the Republicans rallied behind Frémont as a champion of freedom and a bulwark against the spread of slavery. Fillmore, on the other hand, sought to appeal to voters who were disillusioned by both major parties, although those efforts will be largely overshadowed by the larger battle between Buchanan and Frémont. The nation was teetering on the edge of a full-blown crisis as the question of slavery threatened to tear the whole nation apart. And nowhere was this more clear than in Kansas, where the concept of popular sovereignty was put to the test. This territory became a battleground between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers, leading to a period of violence so intense that it earned the nickname Bleeding Kansas. One of the most shocking events was the sacking of Lawrence in May of 1856. Lawrence, a town founded by anti-slavery settlers, became the target of pro-slavery forces. These forces, consisting of both settlers and men from Missouri known as border ruffians, stormed the town, looting and destroying property, including the Free State Hotel and the offices of 2 anti-slavery newspapers. The attack on Lawrence sent shockwaves through the nation, highlighting the escalating tensions over slavery. In response to the sacking of Lawrence, abolitionist John Brown and his followers will go on a retaliatory attack known as the Pottawatomie Massacre. On the night of May 24, 1856, John Brown and his men dragged 5 pro-slavery settlers from their homes along the Pottawatomie Creek and executed them with swords. Brown's actions were intended to send a message that the abolitionist movement would not be intimidated, but it also deepened the divisions between North and South. Meanwhile, the conflict over slavery spilled into the halls of Congress. Debates on the issue grew increasingly bitter, often descending into personal attacks. The tensions reached a violent peak in May of 1856 when Senator Charles Sumner, a staunch abolitionist from Massachusetts, delivered a fiery speech condemning the pro-slavery forces in Kansas and singling out Senator Andrew Butler of South Carolina. 2 days later, Butler's nephew, Representative Preston Brooks, approached Sumner at his desk in the Senate chamber and brutally beat him with a cane. Brooks struck Sumner repeatedly, leaving him in a pool of blood and unconscious. And this attack just further polarized the nation. While Southerners held Brooks as a hero, even some of his Southern colleagues gifting him canes, Northerners were outraged, viewing the incident as a symbol of the South's willingness to use violence to silence opposition. The events were not isolated incidents, but were reflective of a nation that was deeply divided and on the brink of civil war. The violence in Kansas and the physical confrontations in Congress were clear indications that the political system was failing to address the crisis of slavery. Amidst this backdrop, the election took on an almost apocalyptic tone, with both sides warning of dire consequences if the other were to prevail. Republicans accused Democrats of being puppets of the slave power, intent on spreading slavery throughout the entire nation. Democrats warned that if the Republicans win, you will see the dissolution of the Union and a destruction of the Southern way of life. The election saw intense voter turnout, especially in the North, where the Republican message resonated with many who were outraged by the violence in Kansas and the perceived expansion of the slave system. Frémont's campaign focused on the moral imperative to halt the expansion of slavery, warning of the dangers of the slave power, and calling for a new birth of freedom in America. The election of 1856 was a close and hard-fought battle, but in the end, James Buchanan emerged victorious. He won 174 electoral votes to Frémont's 114, with Fillmore carrying only Maryland and securing 8 electoral votes. Buchanan's victory was largely due to his success in the South and his ability to win several key states in the North, including Pennsylvania and Indiana. However, the election results also reveal the growing sectional divide in the country. Frémont's strong showing in the northern states demonstrated the rising power of the Republican Party and the increasing polarization of American politics. For the first time, a major political party had won the electoral votes of nearly every free state on an explicitly anti-slavery platform. Buchanan's victory did very little to calm the tensions that had been building in the 1850s. His presidency will be marked by political strife and the continued breakdown of national unity, culminating in the secession of the southern states and the eventual outbreak of the American Civil War in 1861. The election of 1856, therefore, stands as a critical moment in American history, a moment when the nation stood at a crossroads, and the decisions made by its leaders would determine the course of its future. As we reflect on the election of 1856, we see a nation on the brink of irreparable divide. This election highlighted the deepening chasm between North and South, the rise of new political forces, and the failure of old compromises to resolve the issue of slavery. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.